I'm standing in front of Lincoln College on Brome Place in North Adelaide. We can just zoom in there. This was the residence where Dr. Duncan lived in his short stay in Adelaide. And he was living here in this college on the night of his drowning. Just a bit of background information on Dr. Duncan. He was born George Ian Ogilvy Duncan on July 20th, 1930. In London to New Zealand-born parents. They immigrated to Victoria in 1937 when he was still a child. He obtained his PhD in 1964, and in 1966 to 1971 he returned back to Britain and taught law at the University of Bristol before he took up a position on March 25th, 1972 as a law lecturer at the University of Adelaide. And of course that's where he was and what he was doing on the night that he drowned. Now he didn't, this area is only about, if I just gently pan to my right, it's about 1 kilometre, maybe 1.2, 1.3 kilometres from the River Torrens and the location of Dr. Duncan's drowning. So certainly within walkable distance, but I believe on the night of his murder, Dr. Duncan drove to King William Road, parked and walked to the Torrens. But he would have been, this was his final residence here at Lincoln College in Adelaide. On the night of Wednesday, May the 10th, 1972, Dr. George Ian Ogilvy Duncan was thrown into the River Torrens in this general location by a group of men and drowned. Today marks the 50th anniversary of Dr. Duncan's drowning murder. It is May the 10th, 2022, and this is the location where it occurred. I'm standing on the Adelaide University footbridge, which overlooks the area. This area here, all the way up until the King William Road Bridge, was considered the #1 beat, a gay meeting spot. Now in 1972, homosexuality was illegal all across Australia. Committing a homosexual act was a criminal offence, and of course the South Australian Police Vice Squad had the task of policing this area, and it was these factors that led to the drowning murder of Dr. Duncan. That is the Adelaide University footbridge. This is the path along the River Torrens on the southern bank. I am facing in a northerly direction. Behind me is Victoria Drive. Now somewhere in this area was Dr. Duncan thrown into the river. Now Dr. Duncan came to the Torrens in this area at around 11 p.m. that Wednesday night, May 10th, 1972. It was around in this area that he was accosted by a group of men and thrown into the Torrens. A second man, 27-year-old Roger James, was also thrown into the Torrens. course, Roger James, albeit suffering a broken ankle, survived, but Dr. Duncan drowned. And this is the area where it happened. After James pulled himself out of the Torrens with his broken ankle, he managed to drag himself up the banks of the Torrens. See, it's a bit of a steep climb. Whether he walked or whether he used the pathways, I don't know, but with a broken ankle, he would have been, the water would have been cold, he would have been in shock. But he did manage to pull himself out of the river and make his way up here to Victoria Drive. This is Victoria Drive, which separates the University of Adelaide to the Torrens. Somewhere along here that Roger James made it and flagged down a car, and a Good Samaritan stopped the car in this area and drove the injured James to the nearby Royal Adelaide Hospital, which is just around the corner. Well, it used to be anyway, 1972. Of course, that driver was none other than Bevan Spencer von Einem. An amazing coincidence. Von Einem was at the Torrens that night and happened to be driving by and, you know, assisted Roger James and drove him to the hospital. As you can see here, there are memorials for Dr. Duncan. And today being the 50th anniversary, as you can see, someone has left flowers. There is this sign here. Dr. Duncan, a life tragically lost but a state transformed, detailing the crime and how Dr. Duncan's murder was the impetus for reforming the homosexual laws and decriminalising homosexuality in 1975. That's quite a nice tribute here. And there's another one if we move over toward the beginning of the footbridge. As we can see, other flowers have been left. There's a little plaque under here, so I'll just delicately lift up these flowers. Now there's a plaque here for Dr. Duncan, which is a bit hard to read in the sun. It says, in memory of Dr. George Duncan, whose death by drowning on May 10th, 1972, near here, at the hands of persons unconvicted, precipitated homosexual law reform in South Australia, making it the first state in Australia in 1975 to decriminalise homosexual relations between consenting adults. We will remember him. So that is the little plaque here for Dr. Duncan. Let's put those flowers back. So this is the scene of Dr. Duncan's drowning. Right here. As I always do, it's one thing to see the scene in the nice sunshine, but it adds a different perspective when we see it as it happened, which was in the night time. So on the surface of it, Dr. Duncan's drowning here at the Torrens may have appeared to be the work of a bunch of yahoos indulged in what they refer to as gay bashing. But it soon became apparent that the attack on Dr. Duncan and Roger James was far more sinister, because almost immediately it was identified by police that 3 Vice Squad police officers were here on the Torrens at around the time Dr. Duncan and Roger James were attacked. Dr. Duncan's body was retrieved from the Torrens here on the next morning, May 11th, 1972, at around 9 AM. The 3 police Vice Squad officers identified were Francis Cawley, Michael Clayton and Brian Hudson. But there's always been speculation that a 4th man was involved. But that 4th man has never been positively identified. But from the beginning, it was known that those 3 police officers were here at the Torrens that night. And on May the 20th, 1972, 10 days after the attack, they were questioned, but refused to answer questions. In June 1972, just a few weeks later, an inquest was held into the drowning, which didn't come to any real conclusions. Though on June 30th, 1972, the 3 officers, Cawley, Clayton and Hudson, were suspended for not answering questions and breaching police protocols of that nature. The trio soon resigned from the police force to avoid having to answer questions. On July the 27th, 1972, the South Australian Police Commissioner, Harold Salisbury, called in 2 detectives from New Scotland Yard to investigate the case. I think at the time there were rumours and innuendo that perhaps the police were covering things up, which may in fact be well founded. So, to assuage the public's doubts, the New Scotland Yard detectives were called in to offer an independent inquiry. But on October the 25th, 1972, the New Scotland Yard detectives finished their inquiry, again with no results. They admitted they met a wall of silence, and that police had closed ranks and were less than forthcoming about what was happening. So that's where the drowning murder of Dr. Duncan sort of sat for the next 13 years. But then it suddenly exploded back into the public. On July the 30th, 1985, a former police Vice Squad officer named Mick O'Shea gave an interview to the Advertiser newspaper here in Adelaide, which was printed over the next few days. And in that, O'Shea, who'd resigned from the police force in 1981, made some explosive allegations, saying that the 3 officers, Cawley, Hudson and Clayton, were the ones responsible for Dr. Duncan's attack, that the police had covered it up. In the wake of these revelations, South Australian Police launched a new inquiry, set up a task force, and that came to fruition on February the 5th, 1986. The 3 police officers, Cawley, Clayton and Hudson, were charged with Dr. Duncan's manslaughter. However, on October the 28th, 1986, the manslaughter charge against Brian Hudson was dismissed. However, the 2 remaining officers, Cawley and Clayton, were committed to stand trial for the manslaughter of Dr. Duncan. And their trial went ahead in 1988, but on September the 30th, 1988, both Francis Cawley and Michael Clayton were acquitted of the manslaughter of Dr. Duncan. And that was, what's that now, 33 years ago. And no other charges have ever been laid against anyone responsible for Dr. Duncan's drowning murder. And as I say this, on the 50th anniversary of Dr. Duncan's murder, the case remains unsolved, and a $200,000 reward is still on offer for the drowning murder of Dr. Duncan here at the River Torrens. I'm on the banks of the River Torrens on the southern side. I'm just underneath the King William Road Bridge. Jolly's boathouse to my right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk this section of the Torrens to the University footbridge, to the scene where Dr. Duncan was attacked. Now this is the area that was known as the number 1 beat, a gay meeting spot between, we'll just pan back around to that's the King William Road Bridge, and the number 1 beat extended all the way down towards the University footbridge. Jolly's Boathouse restaurant to my right. Now whether this is still a functioning beat or not, I have absolutely no idea, but it certainly was for a long time, and it certainly was on the night of May the 10th, 1972. Of course, this beat was patrolled by the Vice Squad back in those days when homosexuality was illegal, and it was later alleged that on the night of May the 10th, 1972, a bunch of Vice Squad police had a farewell party at one of the city's night spots, or a restaurant or something, bar, farewelling one of the Vice Squad. And as the night wore on, in a jovial mood, they decided they would walk down here to the Torrens and indulge in one of their favourite pastimes, which was assaulting and terrorising people here along the Torrens. Any men they saw, they assumed were gay men, and as they described it, they would flick poofters in. A form of gay bashing, and apparently it was a common practice. I'm sure it was also a common practice among non-police, but the fact that police engaged in it is just absolutely atrocious. But anyway, that was alleged. It's never been proven in court. As I said, the 3 Vice Squad officers who were charged with Dr. Duncan's death were later acquitted. But it does seem the most obvious scenario. So we're heading up towards the University footbridge. As you see, it's obviously night time now. We are still on the 50th anniversary of Dr. Duncan's drowning. The Dr. Duncan drowning occurred at around 11 PM that Wednesday night. Obviously, as the night wears on, it's more and more sparse down here. This time of the evening is still pretty busy with people walking and joggers, etc. It's a beautiful night. May the 10th, 1972. The weather was virtually identical temperature-wise. I can't testify to whether it was sunny or not, but the maximum temperature on May 10th, 1972 was 20 degrees Celsius, which was what today's forecast was actually, and the minimum forecast was, well, the minimum reached on that night in 1972 was 10 degrees Celsius, and it'll probably get down to something similar tonight. So very identical weather. So you see the Torrens very placid. I mean, being thrown into the Torrens It would be very cold in there. I mean, it's not freezing, but it certainly would be cold, and it's dark, and the shock of it undoubtedly what contributed to Dr. Duncan drowning. Dr. Duncan also only had one lung, I believe, as a result of tuberculosis, which wouldn't have helped the situation. But we're coming up to the footbridge now. And right we're to the spot where it happened 50 years ago. University footbridge just up ahead of here. Sure you can see it or not, but it's hard to see in the dark obviously, but it's just around there somewhere. So there's somewhere in this vicinity was where Dr. Duncan and Roger James were accosted by a group of men. Both were thrown into the Torrens. And of course, tragically, Dr. Duncan drowned. And this is where it happened, right here. Southern banks of the River Torrens. Such a serene area. There's the footbridge up there. So that's the footbridges. This is where it happened 50 years ago tonight. Crime that would become infamous throughout Australia. And of course would have far-reaching effects in terms of the laws regarding homosexuality. Far-reaching effects that no one here that night would have imagined had happened. Just looking back toward the west, King William Road, and into these cold, dark waters was Dr. Duncan thrown. "50 years ago tonight." Just reiterating the final chapter of the story, that when Roger James managed to extricate himself out of the Torrens, he pulled himself up to the street here, which is Victoria Drive, that separates the Torrens from the back of the Adelaide University, and that's where Dr. Duncan actually worked in 1972. Somewhere on this stretch of road, Victoria Drive, Roger James was rescued by none other than future serial killer Bevan Spencer von Einem. One of those amazing coincidental twists of fate. And that happened right around here. The last time that von Einem would be known as a Good Samaritan. What von Einem was doing here that night, of course, is speculative, but he later claimed he was actually on an assignment from work. Seems a bit dubious, being at 11 at night, but I think he did admit to someone that he was down here having a rendezvous with his with a male friend. Whether you describe him as a boyfriend or not, I have no idea, but I think that's what von Einem was happened to be here that night, and whether he actually saw or heard the attack, he probably did. But that's what he was most likely doing here on the River Torrens this night 50 years ago. Rest in peace, Dr. Duncan.